Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about Homeland Security. Is Homeland Security becoming a domestic military organization? What does that tell us about Trump's moves to dictatorship? Our co-host for the show is Tim Apicella. Our guests for the show are Ben Davis, visiting professor, Toledo University School of Law, and Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, and Manfred Henningsen, emeritus professor of political philosophy, UH Manoa. Welcome to you all to the show. We have to follow and resist Trump's efforts to terminate our civil liberties, and there are many examples these days of how he is doing that and how he will continue to do that. We're going to examine the proliferation of Trump's detention centers, for example. Why is he building them? How is he building them? How is he operating them? How can they exist in the United States of America? How do they compare with his arrangement with El Salvador and his plan to do Alcatraz? Compare with what is going on with the Doge Boys, another kind of nameless, faceless, brown shirt type of organization. Gene, let's start with you. What is going on with these detention centers? Are they authorized by law? How are they staffed? How are they funded? How are they operating?
Those are very good questions, and we really don't have all the answers to those questions. But those questions need to be asked in the open media. They need to be pursued, and we need to find out, because what we are seeing when things pop up above the radar is not pretty. For example, in New Jersey, recently, the mayor of Newark was within his rights to visit a private detention center being maintained by private contractors with the government. However, they have a very close association, apparently, with Homeland Security, which is, after all, a federal, as you might say, law enforcement organization, and the Newark police. So what happened was that the mayor went there to find out this detention center has not cleared all of its regulations. It is potentially a health hazard, and it is not receiving any oversight as to whether or not the management of these prisoners is being conducted correctly. So without responding to the city and its requirements, the mayor went there to find out, and he was there on public property when Homeland Security appeared, and typically they appear in masks, and also present were some legislators. I believe federal legislators were there as well. A small crowd, but there wasn't a protest. And so they waited for an hour until the mayor, who was told to do certain things and complied, left the facility, and they pounced on him, arrested him, detained him. And this was totally irregular because he was within his rights. He was on property, he was following commands, and he said, I felt targeted. I was targeted. So this is the kind of pressure being brought to bear openly on something that apparently the government wants to remain closed to the public. And we still don't have the answers on this organization or this center. And that only represents one of many, and we don't know how many are opening up all over the country. And they're opening up not necessarily where they're that visible. And there are some in Louisiana, for example, where high-profile prisoners that have been snatched from universities have been sent, which is not accessible. It's far away from cities, it's in the countryside, and it's hard to get to. So this is happening within the United States. The Homeland Security officers seem to be somewhat militarized and utilized, just as the military is being conscripted to go to the border and help ICE along the border. These are small steps that, as any really good fascism scholar knows, and they have said this, things happen in small steps. They may happen fast, But they happen in small steps, they happen beneath the radar, and they constitute what I would call a shadow government.
Tim, how concerned are you about this? For example, this detention center in New Jersey, as I understand, is in a property that was not designed to be a detention center. It was actually in a property that was not being rented, but was owned by a Trump supporter. And the government is paying this Trump supporter for the use of this building. That's one point of concern. The other point of concern is the mayor is an American citizen. This had nothing to do with immigration or migration or undocumented aliens or anything like that. So this detention center in which he was detained was used to detain an American citizen, and it had nothing to do with immigration, migration, or undocumented aliens or people, I guess, who had committed crimes. I'm not sure what kind of crimes would qualify for a detention center like this. But what level of concern do you have hearing this story?
I would say it's the same level of concern I had during the Iraq War when Blackwater was contracted by the United States government, Dick Cheney's corporation, where he was a major investor/owner, and all the abuses that took place in Iraq with Blackwater. I'm concerned, as I was with Abu Ghraib, the prison that prisoners were tortured and humiliated. That came out in the news, and people were aghast by it. So yes, the fact that these places that were designed perhaps as jail, I'm thinking of the Texas Jim Hogg County Jail that's been used as a booking center, all sorts of places around the Southwest. And to Gene's point, they were never set up to hold large amount of people in them. And so we have potential human rights violations, particularly if children are part of that detention. So yeah, extremely concerned. And it's like, we'll do it until you catch us, and catch us if you can. And there's only so many journalists and news organizations that could go around and catch something that's happening in a covert manner. And we're just lucky that a journalist can come upon these things and report on it. Journalists can't be everywhere all at once. So how many haven't we discovered? That's the question. How many exist that we have no idea exist? I just came from Vietnam and visited what is called Can Dao Prison on the island of Can Dao. And one of our House representatives in 1972 found that it was a torture chamber. And who was running it? The South Vietnamese. Who was in it? North Vietnamese, and a lot of them were women because they were political prisoners. Who was really in charge of things in South Vietnam back during the South Vietnam War? The United States. And we allowed it to exist. He discovered that in 1973. The prison was liberated in 1975 when the Americans finally left Vietnam. So my point is, do we turn a blind eye to known human rights violations? We certainly did in Iraq. Why would this be any different in our own country? The shadow government is a proper term that may be taking place right now.
Ben, it was a very interesting, surprising, and perhaps creative move for Trump to fly some of these deportees, and that's another question, whether they were properly deported, to El Salvador and put them in a jail that he paid. He organized that jail with that prison with El Salvador, and stashed them in a torture, horrible, inhumane prison, and they're still there. They're still there. And at the same time, he's undermining his attorney general, and Stephen Miller are undermining habeas corpus. And they are ignoring any due process. It seems like it's without structure, but very creative. We have never ever seen that before. And shades of the future, he also tried to set up a prison in Libya. I don't think that worked. He's trying to open up or reopen Alcatraz, which is really a horrible place, a dump that hasn't been used in decades and decades. So it sounds like he's creating a network of prisons for people, including American citizens, who he's angry with. Your thoughts about that? Were you surprised too? Are you surprised now? Are you offended as a law professor and somebody who has studied the law, studied civil rights, studied due process?
What comes to mind is, notwithstanding all the noise you hear, right, is a line from the movie Cool Hand Luke, which is that what we have here is a lack of communication. Okay? In other words, we are not getting the information to be able to decide what's going on. We have a government that is picking up people and then playing whack-a-mole with their lawyers and taking them around the country to different places. And the lawyers have to, because they have to file where the person is, have to keep filing in different places, like, trying to catch them as a catch can. That moving around part, people don't talk about that much. It's clearly a game by Homeland Security to avoid court review. And that's the part that I find particularly disturbing, is that you see these horrendous pictures of people being picked up, and you know that they're being put into a system that is trying to hide them from the courts. And in my head, that kind of sounds like disappearing people that we used to talk about. And when you talk about this constellation of detention centers, what comes to anybody's mind who's been around for a while, I think, is the good old Russian term of a gulag. An American gulag. And then when we have people being literally whisked away in the middle of the night to a foreign country, to export our gulag to El Salvador or Libya, which it is a kind of out of control lawlessness, that you say, who's at the center of this? That's why I'm a little encouraged. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I'm encouraged by the Judge Boasberg, who is seriously looking at, or he said there's probable cause to say that there is criminal contempt. And now he's trying to get the work done to find out just who gave the order to send those people to El Salvador, because he wants to have either the Department of Justice, or failing them, and a prosecutor that he would name, which he's allowed to do, go after the architects of this American domestic and international gulag. And I will give you I don't know what I would bet, I would give even odds that if you looked at it, you would find 2 or 3 people at the heart of it. Clearly Stephen Miller, clearly the head of Homeland Security there, Secretary Noem, and they're like conniving to have this stuff happen, and of moving people around and all these things. And I would also say that to the extent that these detention gulag centers are being made with private contractors, we got another corruption flow, payoff flow. Another one that, I taking our money, our American taxpayer money, and shoveling it to your friend. And then when you try to go in, like Gene was talking about, simply blowing off the local mayor, blowing off members of Congress who have a right of inquiry. And if you ever watch the video, just watching a kind of thuggery, really a level of thuggery in the manner in which those folks from the Homeland Security are operating. And if you watch what happened in Worcester with that mother in Worcester with the daughter who was 16 and the baby, what do you see? You see thuggery. That's all it is. The old kind of brown shirty kind of thuggery. And part of that is, I think, related to the fact that a number of these people, what I understand, who are in these roles, have actually never been trained in how to address these kinds of situations. They've been being picked up ad hoc, like from the Homeland Security Investigations Office, and told, you're not going to be out here going up to pick up folks. But they don't know how to pick up. They know how to investigate, but they don't know how to do those kinds of detentions. So they're making it up like they saw it on some TV show or some movie. No one's trained these people. Now, when you don't train people how to do this thing properly, guess what happens? Bad things. And now let's imagine in every one of that constellation of gulags, you have untrained people not knowing how to really deal with people in those kind of settings. What do you think's going to happen? Bad things. Bad things. I'm awaiting the moment when 60 Minutes, just like it did with Abu Ghraib, does a report. And we see how appalling it truly is. Okay? Now, once we see it, what happens? The people in the government are very good at making things disappear. There's an old rule in the government which is like, malfeasance is done at the bottom, misfeasance is done at the top. Or as we've all heard, that wonderful mistakes were made, right? I don't know how many times have you heard in the last 110 days, oh, that was a mistake. Oh, that was a mistake. Mistakes were made. That's the cover that will happen by these people at the top. Terribly sorry. Mistakes were made. And at some point you say, that's a whole lot of mistakes that are going on here. And that's the moment, where maybe that idea of the presumption of regularity of what is going on by the current government gets rebutted before the courts. And when that happens, when they don't believe in the good faith of the government, you watch it. I'm telling you, because, for example, the Alien Enemies Act in the Western District of Pennsylvania, there's a district court judge that has said that it's okay to use the Alien Enemies Act. Well, that judge did not question the predicate for use of the Alien Enemies Act, which is that there was an invasion. They took the government at face value. But when you go and see the decision of the judge down in the Southern District of Texas, he said that that kind of approach, which is basically a political question doctrine approach, doesn't work when it's a statute. And so he could go in and evaluate the alleged invasion on behalf of the Venezuelan government, and he concluded, no, there was no invasion. Therefore, it's improper to apply the Alien Enemies Act. So that presumption of regularity of the government, the federal government, is something that I think is really, really at the center of what we're watching in the courts. Are the judges going to keep that presumption up, or are they going to, even though they've been sort of trained that way, and it's hard for them to accept it, to say, no, there's something that stinks here. That's what I like about Judge Boasberg, is he's basically saying, no, there's something that stinks here, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. But that's where we're at right now. So it's awful.
Yeah, the judge that found the Alien Act summarily found that the act applied was a Trump-appointed judge, by the way.
Yeah.
Manfred, let me go to you. We have here these fellows who come around, and they're not in uniform. They don't have any identification. They wear black masks. They have guns. They do have guns. And they flash the guns. In the Oklahoma case, they flashed the guns in the middle of the night on a woman and her children, which I thought was interesting. Apparently they don't make a distinction between American citizens and aliens. It's just anything goes. We don't know how they get their instructions. We don't know how they're organized. In the case of police force, we know who's who. We know what the rank is. We know the name. It's on the badge. And we can, make a stink if we want. But we can't do that with Homeland Security guys because they're incognito. This is very troubling. And every time one of these incidents takes place, we find out more that they're incognito, and they're not changing that. Even if the press attacks them for being incognito. And then you have this extraordinary, spiriting people off to foreign countries with, awful prisons. And he's still trying to do it. He's still trying to open up Guantanamo and Alcatraz, and for that matter, Libya. So this is very troubling because all the guardrails are breaking down. And I wanted to ask you how this compares with the Gulag, as Ben suggested, and ask you how it compares with the brown shirts, which I think Gene suggested, and how it compares with the Doge boys who come in without identification, without any apparent authority whatsoever, and take data, which is sometimes critical, and also fire people on their own account. It's all kind of, it's the end of guardrails. And so I'm asking you to also compare the Doge MO with the Homeland Security MO as we have come to know it. Manfred, what are your thoughts?
I think it was last Sunday when 3 American political scientists published in the New York Times a grandiose article about how authoritarianism equal fascism creeps slowly into America, into the power structure of American society. I mean, it was an extraordinary detailed analysis of what we have already seen and what may happen in the future. Now, for me, since you mentioned Nazi Germany, the interesting thing about the period after January 30th, 1933 in Germany was that you have slowly the emergence of these concentration camps. I mean, they didn't exist. And they were not immediately, these extraordinary camps that the first one was Dachau and then Sachsenhausen came. They were small units in which the thugs in brown uniforms, the stormtroopers, put primarily communists, social democrats, trade union people, all the left with whom, the Nazis had fought in the streets for quite some time, especially in Berlin. The street battles, armed street battles, were extraordinary. So what you have in a few weeks is rounding up all of these known opponents of the Nazis and putting them in spontaneously created concentration camps. Now, I don't know whether, and the people who did it, some of them did it in SA uniforms, stormtrooper uniforms. Many of the others were simply running along with them. So what you have is an extraordinary parallelism that happens in the United States. I don't think it's the Gulag. I mean, the Gulag may become, if they succeed in completing this move of the American political system toward this kind of authoritarian system, may come to that. But I mean, in the Gulag, you had organized the official representatives of the state. In Nazi Germany, I mean, in the month of February and March of '33, they were not officials. They were very often spontaneously coming together. Now, whether we are on the move in that direction.
Let me add, Manfred, that these guys without the uniforms and the black masks do not present IDs. You have no idea what their names are, what organization they're with. They don't have search warrants or arrest warrants with them. You don't know why they are fingering, attacking, detaining anyone. I guess the only interesting point is that seem to get on the telephone and talk to somebody else somewhere else before they actually make a detention. So it's all ad hoc,
Right.
and it's with people who are unidentified. And that does sound a lot like what you're talking about in Germany.
Yeah, but I mean, those are the mugger people, and they don't give a shit, for identities. I mean, the only thing I think at this point that saves us from moving more and more in that direction is the wish of Donald Trump to get the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, the message that he issued there, on his trip about Syria is part of that campaign. And he will continue doing that. He will try to do that, if he goes to Istanbul, if Putin really goes there, meets Zelensky, he will continue doing that. So the hope of Nobel Peace Prize is the only thing that maybe protects us at this point from becoming really.
Oh, I wish it were so, but he's probably not going to get anywhere near the Nobel Peace Prize.
I'm not so sure about that.
Well, let me move on to Tim. Tim, one of the things that's troubling here is something you mentioned, and that is the role of the press, because the press has to deal with Trump's efforts to keep all this secret. If you ask, for example, how these groups are organized, who's at the top, who's at the bottom, what rate or rank or they hold within the organization, what their rights are, what their powers are, what their authority is, you probably couldn't find out. And they would, and if you ask them on the scene there, for example, in that area around the detention camp in Newark, if you ask it, can I please see your identification? Which is not an unreasonable question for a domestic engagement with a law enforcement officer. They'd probably arrest you for asking. So I'm very concerned about that. And now the press can catch some of this, and it certainly did about Newark. But then the fickle finger of the media, has had many issues since Newark, which was only a week ago. And my question to you is the press really attending to this? This is shocking the conscience. It is reminiscent of the worst dictatorship maneuvers of the 20th century. Is the press doing its job?
It comes down to access, and whether it's access, the press getting access into a security area that has a bunch of thugs, lined up, which the mayor of Newark found out the hard way, or it's access to future Trump events. We saw the media retract greatly in their role and responsibilities to report on Donald Trump and what's going on with Donald Trump and the administration, because they feared they would be denied access to Trump events, press briefings, things of that nature. So we saw, and I don't know if it's improved or not, but we saw senior management of these media organizations back off. And they backed off, therefore the management and staff backed off. I think that's getting better. So yes, you're correct, Jay, in the question. The media is not doing their job as they used to. They've got one hand tied behind the back, and they're doing their best, but there's limited number of journalists, as I said before, and certainly getting access into these secret locations that are known or not known is difficult at best. And I suppose another part of the equation is America. America believes that some of these Donald Trump initiatives of deportation, particularly of the bad seeds, the criminals, is something that we all want to see. However, when they abuse the law, there's a half-hearted attempt to protest about it. Because in the end, we're getting rid of these bad elements, but they're not bad elements. They're United States citizens. They're this whole swath of population being broad brush painted as diehard criminals. And we know that that's not the case. How would we know it's not the case? They're not given due process to prove that they're not. And so part of the problem is the American public going, well, maybe the ends does justify the means. And that's a problem, because there needs to be more moral outrage from the American public, which the media can only do so well to try to publicize. But the protest needs to come ultimately from American voters to their Congress people.
You know, for the most part, the people who are being victimized by this detention system are Black and brown. But at the same time, documented or otherwise, some of them are American citizens, just a mistake. At the same time, Trump has organized a substantial group of white sanctuary seekers to come here from South Africa. I never knew that anyone from South Africa needed, especially now, needed to seek sanctuary. But he is letting them all in, even though he's stopping anyone claiming sanctuary at the southern border, Black and brown especially. And so I wonder if you can help me reconcile why he would allow sanctuary to this group of white people from South Africa and deny it for the people from Latin America.
Well, I think he gave that answer in his first term. Remember, Donald Trump says, about immigration from shithole countries, shithole nations. But he's more than happy to welcome immigrants from Scandinavian countries. Well, what was the difference in his mind? Black, brown people versus Anglo-Saxons. What can I say? He gave us the answer in his first term. It's all about race and the fact that he's a racist.
Yeah, sanctuary to South Africans. That's really, again, an outrage. Absolutely. Gene, this all reflects Trump's attitude about the Constitution, about civil liberties, about court orders in the judicial system, and the rule of law in general. My favorite quote over recent days has been, he doesn't know if he's obligated to follow the Constitution, even though he took an oath twice to follow the Constitution. But he doesn't know. And it seems clear that he does not consider himself obligated to follow the Constitution. Even now, that birthright citizenship issue is going to the Supreme Court. He's pushing it there. And he's also pushing a third term, which the Constitution doesn't really allow. So I wonder what your thoughts are about how all of this integrates his denial of the rule of law, of the Constitution, of civil liberties, due process, judicial orders, and so forth, and the creation of this detention system around the country. It seems like the whole thing is unhinged, and there is no real guardrail to prevent it from getting worse. Your thoughts?
Head of the New York Times company and publisher, A.G. Sulzberger, wrote a very long and interesting article entitled A Free People Need a Free Press yesterday in the New York Times. And he talked about the threats and inconveniences and coercions that journalists are under in this country. We're used to reading about things like this in Russia. We're not used to reading about it here. That's very important because publishers don't write long articles in their flagship newspapers to alert the public, especially when that newspaper is the premier national newspaper in the United States. So we know something is going on. We know that 3 of the most preeminent fascism scholars from Yale have decided to go to Toronto and to teach at the University of Toronto. And that would be Timothy Snyder and Jason Stanley and Timothy Snyder's wife, who has some knowledge of Eastern European authoritarianisms. And they are basically giving us also a flag and a warning that something different is going on now. So yes, I think that this administration is attempting to slow walk and fast track a takeover of democracy and to render the executive branch of the government the only branch of government in which power is concentrated. And it can do what it wants. And it is doing this by manipulating on many, many fronts and challenging. And I can only tell you that although everything seems very ad hoc and is not carried out in a very competent manner, it is basically something that has been thought about for many years. We know about Project 2025, but there's been a lot more that's been going on since 2015, at least, in the minds of the individuals carrying this out. And the Supreme Court, particularly 2 judges on the Supreme Court, have paved the way for the exercise of this extraordinary power by the immunity decision, saying that the president, yes, he can stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not have to pay for it. And when you say, well, maybe he will have to account for that in 2028, when his term is up, his 2 terms are up, that only gives him more reason to basically continue his regime if he puts a regime in place. So yes, there are these things going on with the press and with the military and with the states of emergency and the executive orders and the idea of an invasion, that immigration is an invasion like a war, that we're under state of war, and therefore these extraordinary powers can be exercised by the executive. However, also we have seen Donald Trump in his first 100 days plus back up. A lot of what this man does is performance. Remember that any fascist leader is a performer, and he performs on a national and international stage to create an impact and to demoralize the people he's trying to manipulate and control. So the arrest of a Newark mayor, who probably will be found completely in the right, and he should never have been arrested, is performance. You get the impact you want. You tell other mayors, be scared, do what I say. The attempt to corrupt the mayor of New York in order to do his bidding, that he would postpone his trial on charges as long as he was doing the president's bidding. That's another mark of a fascist regime, or an authoritarian regime at least. So we're seeing all these markers and warnings and flags and impacts in a very haphazard way, but it's been very closely planned. It has to be, because you can't act on these many different fronts all at once.
So let me go to you, Ben. Ben, you're the solution man. Call it the legal solution man. We're not handing you a very rosy picture here, but if you were going to try to figure out how this could be countermanded, the antidote, if you will, to the poison, what would you say? What is in the kit bag of the liberals who would like to retain democracy in this country?
Well, I have no great expertise. I read other people and see what they say and what they advise, like some of the people that Gene talked about. And, at the heart of it, it is to resist from the beginning. Now, there's an argument made that maybe we're a little slow in getting to resistance, right? Because they are moving at a very quick pace. But to find
we're not at the beginning anymore, Ben.
Right.
We're not at the beginning.
Fair enough. And so, the idea of these efforts to bring, 200 cases in court on various aspects of what's gone on over the last 100 days, the efforts of people to boycott Tesla, or who you pick them, all those kinds of things are ways of impacting this. I think that the idea of the senator going down to El Salvador and say, I want to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, or those members of Congress standing out in front of Delaney Hall wanting to use their right to inquire. And then, or even these events on the steps of the Capitol that happened a little while ago. I think there are many of these little things. I understand, for example, when they fire the head of the Library of Congress, so these DOJ types tried to come in to run the Congress because I think it's the Deputy Attorney General has been, quote unquote, named the librarian of Congress. the people at the Library of Congress said, hell no, you can't come in. Those are the key things, to me, is to say the hell no. Today I was shopping and I have my Pray for Foreigners t-shirt on, okay? Because I had to go get some stuff for dinner before I came here. Some guy looks at me, smiles, and says, I like your t-shirt. It's not much, but in his head somewhere, maybe it says a little thing to him like, this is not right. And it's okay. And somebody else also thinks it, and they're not afraid to say it. Tomorrow night, there'll be a demonstration, which I found out last week, has been going on for 7 months in front of the federal courthouse here in Charlottesville about Gaza, complaining about what's going on there. You would say, well, who cares what people in Charlottesville, Virginia think about that, right? Yes, but all those cars going by saw the 50 people there, whatever it was, and it said, gee, the narrative I'm being required to believe is not the narrative that, in fact, is believed by everyone. I don't buy it.
Manfred, faced with what Ben is talking about, protests, a little here, a little there, lawsuits, what have you, what does the dictator do? And what did the dictators do in Europe? Did they take heed of the criticism or just march right on through?
So far, the Trumpists have not succeeded in shredding the constitutional order. I think you still have courageous judges, you have courageous journalists, you have courageous intellectuals who are fighting back. And so I think we should not over-dramatize the loss of this critical.
I'm only asking you, Manfred, whether it's going to work. Ben had a whole array of steps you could take. We know. The question is whether it's going to work against Trump and his friends.
Apart from this notion that he wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize, I think he is not at that point, and the MAGA crowd is not at the point where they are beginning to overthrow the whole constitutional system. I am sorry, I am not believing that they will succeed.
All right, let's move on. Then we gotta close up. We're almost out of time. Tim, can you take this moment for your closing remarks?
Sure. I like what Ben said. Small actions, any way we can. I remember on this show, and there was a movie recently produced on this. There was a gentleman during the Nazi regime that wrote little note cards and left them around town, mocking and criticizing the Nazi regime. Unfortunately, he was eventually caught and executed. Fortunately, we're not there, and maybe we do things like that where we receive a citation for littering versus execution. But small actions, any way we can, to show the administration that people are paying attention, they're listening, and they don't like it.
Jane?
I think that Trump has already backed off when he sees that his base, which remains at about 40% of the electorate, when his base is impacted on the tariffs, for example, he's backing off. He's backing off in other ways. What I started to say is they put on a big show and a big performance to create an impact, and then he backs off. But then you don't know, you're uncertain because it's a pause or it's a ceasefire, that it's not an end to something. Maybe he can jump back into the ring again. So he's testing. He's testing the limits of the power that he's already accrued. He's seeking to accrue more power, and he's doing a lot of it under the radar with private contractors and irregular contracts and different kinds of manipulations that constitute what I would say a shadow state, much like Hitler consolidated. It took him 5 years to consolidate the state between 1933 and 1938. And we're in that realm of things in terms of a historical parallel right now.
Okay. Ben, your thoughts?
I just think that the back and forth that Gene is saying is exactly what's going on. But you don't get it back unless there's pressure to push them back. because they all want to go forward. So we each have to find our ways, and I'll go along with Tim on that, to find our way to push back to the extent we can. But we have to understand that out there at some point, I'm just awaiting them going to violence, because that's the last little tool they have, is to act. Now we're seeing violence with regards to undocumented people right now, but we're seeing some things that are happening, like, for example, a Trump-appointed district attorney out in Los Angeles is basically giving a sweetheart deal to a guy a police officer who assaulted this woman. And would normally, it's like a 10-year thing. He's trying to turn the crime down to just being a misdemeanor that the guy's in for a year. These are the kinds of things that are done to basically encourage violence without saying it. Oh, mistakes were made, right? Remember? But and that's the worry I have. So people have to be careful with regards to how they approach this, because these folks are just raring to use violence on groups, like we saw in Lafayette Square, first Trump term, where peaceful demonstrators had people on horses, and all kinds of stuff happened to them. Trump loves that, and unfortunately, there are a number of people around him who I think love that too.
Yeah, he's moving toward normalizing violence. If he gets away with it, then he's going to be emboldened to do more of it. Yeah. So, Manfred, you're last. What do we do as individuals? What do we do? Do we have to be more careful now of what we say, what we do, whether we protest or not, whether we sign letters to the editor? Do we have to be more careful? How do we conduct ourselves?
We, as well, especially the Democrats, have to regain their voice, and it has to be a loud voice. I mean, the mayor of New York, Baraka, he's the son of a very famous black writer. He, I think, moved in the right direction, but I think it's Sanders who is voicing, having his level of noise in his voice is what people like Schumer really have to adopt. The Democrats have not only regained their spine, but they have to regain their voice. And why they have remained silent, I simply do not understand. I find it absolutely amazing, how silent these Democratic leaders have been over the last 100 or so days.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Tim Apicella, our co-host, and to our esteemed guest, Ben Davis, Gene Rosenfeld, Manfred Henningsen. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Keeping the World Company. We've been discussing Homeland Security. Is Homeland Security becoming a domestic military organization, or worse? Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha. Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.